longer than a comma, but shorter than a period, the semicolon is just as valuable. Welcome to Jenn's Writing World. If you have a story to tell, you are in the right place. Let's do it 10 minutes at a time. Well, it's Sunday again, and today's topic is my favorite punctuation. It may seem weird to have a favorite punctuation, but this one isn't just my favorite. It's like my all-time favorite above all other punctuation. And if you saw the thumbnail, you know what it is. It's the semicolon. All right, first of all, the semicolon gets a lot of grief. I'm going to give you an example. This is a quote from Vonnegut. Do not use semicolons. They are transvestite hermaphrodites representing absolutely nothing. All they do is show you've been to college. I hate to disagree with an author as famous as Vonnegut, but semicolons don't do nothing. As a matter of fact, they do things that no other punctuation does. And when used properly and sparsely, they can add a lot of power to your writing. And you don't even have to have gone to college. Today we're going to talk about 3 ways to properly use semicolons. And my hope is that at the end you will understand 1, why they are important, and 2, that they should not be used liberally, because like chili powder, if you add too much, you can ruin everything. But just the right amount can add spice and interest to your story. Let's get started. 1. To connect 2 related complete sentences without the use of a conjunction. Happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. Leo Tolstoy, Anna Karenina. So, if you have a complete sentence, and you have a second complete sentence, and these 2 sentences relate to each other, you could stick them together with a comma and a conjunction, like and, but, or something like that. But you don't have to. One way to make a powerful point to say these 2 ideas are related is to use a semicolon. In this instance, it's sometimes called a super comma, because when you are reading it out loud, you take a breath, you leave a pause between the 2 sentences that is a little longer than a comma, but a little shorter than the period. So what you're saying is, these are complete sentences, but they are related. And therefore, you don't need the period, because a period is a full stop. It says, this is a sentence, this is a sentence. The semicolon, and the beauty of the semicolon, is it lets the reader know the relatability of the 2 sentences. This is what's most important. Both sentences must be complete. If one of them is incomplete, like a dependent clause, and the other one is complete, you put a comma between them, not a semicolon. Here's an example of that. After working all day, Jake really needed a beer. You put a comma between after working all day and Jake really needed a beer. Now, if you wanted to make those both complete sentences, you could use a semicolon, and it would go like this. Jake slaved in the hot sun all day. He desperately desired a beer. Okay, do you get it? The sentences are related, they are both complete, therefore a semicolon can go nicely in between them. Now, if they are not related, but they are complete sentences, you would use a period, and it would look like this. Jake slaved in the hot sun all day. His sister baked a cake. These are good sentences. They could be part of an entire story, but the sentences themselves are not relatable. Therefore, period with each sentence, full stop. This is probably the most common way to use a semicolon. It is also the most common way to get it wrong, which is why I'm kind of harping on this right now, okay? 2 complete sentences, relatable, get a semicolon. Now, hold on a second. They don't have to get a semicolon. That is a choice that you are making, because by making that choice, you are saying, Not only are these sentences relatable, but I want the reader to know they are relatable, thus the semicolon. This is also a case where people can use the semicolon way too much. So you have a bunch of relatable sentences. Good for you. Do not make them all semicolons, because then what it does is it takes the importance of the relatability out of the picture. If all sentences are relatable, then no sentences are relatable. They just become sentences in a story. And all the sentences in a story should be relatable because they're in the story. So what you want to do is the ones that are most important, the ones that you want to be noticed, the ones that need emphasis, those sentences can be connected with semicolons, used sparsely. The second way to use a semicolon is to separate items in a list when the items in the list use commas. This is done for clarity. Now, someday I'm going to go on a rant about the necessity of the Oxford comma. I will not do this here. But we all know that if you are making a list, you put commas between the items. If you have a flag that is red, white, and blue, you're going to say it is red, comma, white, comma, and blue. Yes, I use an Oxford comma. If you have a list, but the items in the list have commas in them, if you just used commas between each item in the list, it would be really confusing. Thus, instead of using commas between these compound items in your list, you use semicolons. And then everybody understands what belongs in each item and what is separating each item. And I do have an example for you. The store carried red, gold, and black shirts, green, silver, and black shirts, blue, silver, and white shirts, and yellow, green, and orange shirts. Could you imagine that sentence if we used commas to separate all those colors? You'd have no way of knowing where one started and another began. It would have been horrible. But by using semicolons, we separate out the multitude items, each individual shirt with all of its colors, along with what is in the list. Semicolons, extremely handy for that. And you don't need Kurt Vonnegut to tell you that the semicolon is useless when you're using it as a list divider. Again, the reason I use an Oxford comma, stop ranting, Jennifer, is for clarity, and is also a reason why I use semicolons in this case. All right, this one is important, and considering that most people do it wrong, since they all say they hate semicolons and never want to use them, let's start doing this next one right. Number 3, to set off however when used in the middle of a sentence. Okay, I'm going to connect you to a Grammar Girl link that is going to explain why however can be used at the beginning of a sentence, but if you're going to use it in the middle of a sentence, you have to use a semicolon with it. Now, what does that make it? That makes it like number 1, where you're making it its own sentence, which is kind of like using it at the beginning of a sentence. So, if you say, however, he didn't want to do that, great. However, comma, he didn't want to do that. But if you say, Shirley told him to go to the store, however, he didn't want to do that, you need a semicolon. This is one of those grammar rules, and you can say, no, I don't like grammar, I don't like following grammar rules, but the fact of the matter is that your editor is going to tell you you should follow it, and I'm a big believer in not making the editors correct the simple grammar rules, and to save it for my more complex problems. So just remember this one. If you use however in the middle of a sentence, it gets a semicolon. If you use 2 complete sentences without a conjunction, they should get semicolons. Did you notice in my example that the 2 sentences were also relatable? One reason that you know they were relatable is because of the word however. That made those sentences relatable. So thus, going up to our example number 1, they would get a semicolon. I brought this up in number 1. I'm going to bring it up again. Use semicolons sparingly. I read a book. Oh my goodness, I will not tell you the name of the book. Let's just say I didn't finish it. It had about 60 semicolons per chapter. I know, because after a few chapters of just being smacked in the face with semicolons, I started counting. And let me tell you, Nothing jars your story more than seeing semicolons all over it. Because as I said, I began to wonder if he thought he was just using commas. Like, oh, I don't want to use too many commas, so we'll throw in semicolons. I certainly didn't think that he was putting them into sentences that were so relatable they needed semicolons. And because he was sprinkling them, because he was pouring semicolons all over this book, I couldn't believe that he was a good storyteller, that he was telling a good story. And I will admit I didn't like the story already, and maybe I was looking for an excuse to put the book down, but that author gave me a really good excuse. And I don't think authors want to give reasons for readers to put the book down. So use the semicolons, use them correctly, and most importantly, use them sparingly. I appreciate your support. If you want to get more videos like this one and my write-ins that I do on Tuesday and Friday, go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below. A like is always appreciated, and I'd love it if you shared the channel with your friends. Today's quote is from Michelle Witt with Manson Street Literary Management. I will put the link to that agency down below, and this is what she said. Focus on improving your writing, not getting published. Don't be so worried, excited to be querying that your manuscript isn't the best it could be. You won't get far with an excellent query, but a subpar manuscript. I totally agree with that. You should work on making your manuscript the best it can be, and one way you can make it the best it can be is to use grammar properly, including semicolons. And maybe if you use them a little bit, you will learn to love them as much as I do. So long from Jenn's writing world, and until next time, write, write, write.